The town wasn't on my GPS. That should have been my first warning, not because there was anything dangerous waiting for me there. No haunted houses, no secret cults, no people hiding in the woods. The danger was quieter than that. It was the kind that changes a man's life so slowly that he doesn't realize he's losing the old one until it's already gone. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 41 years old, and for the last 20 years, I've traveled the country photographing places that people were about to forget: old factories, abandoned farms, dying little towns, broken churches, covered bridges. If something was disappearing, someone at Meridian magazine would eventually send me to capture it before the wrecking crews arrived. People always told me I had the perfect job. They imagined sunsets and mountain views. They didn't see the airport floors I slept on, the birthdays I missed, the marriage that quietly ended while I was 3,000 miles away chasing a photograph that nobody remembers now. My ex-wife once asked me a question I never answered. When this is all over, Daniel, what exactly are you bringing home? At the time, I thought she didn't understand ambition. Years later, I realized she understood it better than I did. 3 weeks ago, my editor walked into my office carrying a thin brown folder. "I've got your cover story." Every photographer dreams about those words. Inside the folder was a place called Hollow Creek Valley, 5 historic covered bridges, a state demolition project, one final chance to photograph them before they disappeared forever. The assignment sounded simple: drive out, take the pictures, come home. But there was one strange thing: almost nobody had heard of the valley. When I searched for Bellwether, the small town nearest the bridges, there was almost nothing. No tourist websites, no local history pages, no travel blogs. Just a few old census records and one article that described it as a place people pass through without meaning to. I should have listened. Instead, I packed 2 cameras, 6 lenses, enough batteries to survive a small war, and started driving. By late afternoon, my GPS signal disappeared. 10 minutes later, my phone lost service. The road narrowed into a strip of cracked asphalt surrounded by old trees. Rain began to fall, then my front tire exploded. I stood in the cold mud, changing it myself, while the sky turned gray above me. When I finally looked up, I saw an old wooden sign leaning beside the road. "Welcome to Bellwether Population 83. Someone had crossed out the number underneath, written by hand, was another. 80. I remember staring at it longer than I should have because for some reason, it felt less like a town sign and more like a warning that someone was keeping count. At that moment, I thought I was there to photograph a dying place. I had no idea that before the week was over, a widow would open her front door, look me in the eyes, and make me question every decision I had made in the last 20 years. The rain became heavier as I drove deeper into Bellwether, not storm rain. The slow, stubborn kind that soaks through a man's jacket and convinces him that every bad decision was entirely his own fault. My spare tire wasn't built for mountain roads. The rental company had made that very clear in the paperwork I hadn't read. So when the narrow road twisted between old maple trees and another warning light appeared on the dashboard, I decided that pride was an expensive hobby. I needed directions, maybe a mechanic at the very least, a phone that still had signal. The first house sat a little way back from the road behind a low stone wall. Smoke drifted from the chimney. 2 bicycles lay in the yard as though their owners had abandoned them halfway through an adventure. Warm yellow light glowed from the kitchen windows. It didn't look like the kind of place strangers visited. It looked like the kind of place strangers remembered. I grabbed my camera bag out of habit, walked through the rain, and climbed the wooden porch steps. For a second, I almost turned around. I had spent 20 years knocking on doors: farmers, fishermen, war veterans, people who had every reason not to trust a man carrying expensive cameras, but something about that little house made me suddenly aware of how alone I was. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again. Footsteps crossed the floor inside. The door opened. A woman stood there with a dish towel over one shoulder and a wooden spoon in her hand. She looked to be somewhere in her early 40s. Dark auburn hair, loosely tied back. A soft green sweater with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. There was flour on one wrist. A few strands of hair had escaped and framed a face that wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It looked real Kend. A little tired around the eyes. The kind of face that had laughed and cried enough times to stop pretending otherwise. She looked at my muddy boots, then my camera bag, then the rain running off my jacket. Finally, she looked at me. "You're either lost," she said quietly, "or you're trying to sell me something." I couldn't help smiling. "I'm lost." She studied me for another second. "But if you need a magazine subscription, I can probably arrange one." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, just the beginning of one. "You're the photographer." That caught me off guard. "I beg your pardon?" "The whole town knows you're here." She opened the door a little wider. "We don't get visitors unless something is being sold, being torn down, or being photographed before it disappears. There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. I'm sorry, I said. For what? Whichever one it is. For the first time, she smiled completely. From somewhere inside the house, a little boy shouted, Mom, Sadie put peas in my milk. A little girl shouted back, he said he needed vitamins. The woman closed her eyes for half a second, then she looked at me again. I should probably deal with that. I nodded. I should probably find the nearest motel. She glanced toward the rain, then toward my car, then back at me. Not on that tire, I'll manage. She looked at me carefully, almost as if she had already decided what kind of man I was, then she stepped aside. My name is Mara Whitaker. The smell of fresh bread and rosemary drifted out from the warm kitchen. And with a kindness that would change my life, she said, You look like you've been on the road a long time. Why don't you stay for dinner? I should have said no. A responsible man would have. I had a hotel waiting 40 minutes away. I had bridges to scout before sunrise. I had deadlines, schedules, and the kind of career that measured success by how little of your personal life survived it. Instead, I stepped inside. The house was warm, not expensive, not perfectly decorated, lived in. The smell of fresh bread mixed with rosemary and something sweet baking in the oven. A small pair of muddy rain boots sat beside the front door. Children's drawings covered one wall of the hallway. One of them looked like a horse. Another looked like an explosion. I wasn't completely sure they weren't the same picture. Mamara hung my wet jacket by the door. You can leave your camera bag there. I looked at it. I usually don't let it out of my sight. She nodded. I had a feeling. A little boy appeared in the kitchen doorway. He couldn't have been older than 8. He looked at me the way small boys look at strangers, half curious, half convinced I might secretly be a pirate. Are you famous? No. Are you rich? Also no, he frowned. Then why do you carry so much expensive stuff? I looked toward Mara. To confuse children into thinking I have a purpose. This time she laughed, a real laugh. It was soft, quick, but somehow it made the whole house feel brighter. A little girl appeared behind the boy. She was younger, missing one front tooth. Holding a wooden spoon like a weapon, she pointed it at me. Mom says you're the bridge man. I've been called worse. She thought about that, then nodded. You don't look dangerous. I'm glad to hear it. Jonah folded his arms. He still could be. Jonah, what? Stop interrogating the guest. I'm protecting the family. Mara smiled. From what? He looked at me carefully. Photographers. I couldn't help laughing. I understand the concern. Mara walked toward the stove. Dinner's almost ready. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the kitchen. I had photographed presidents, mum stars, natural disasters, crowds of 50,000 people. But somehow, standing in a stranger's kitchen while 2 children judged, my character felt more intimidating than all of them. Mara handed me a clean towel. You can dry your hands. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing, just an ordinary moment. But I noticed the simple silver ring hanging from a chain around her neck. Not on her hand, close to her heart. She saw me notice it. Neither of us said anything. Some silences don't need words. Dinner was chicken stew and homemade biscuits. The children argued about peas. Jonah wanted to know if cameras could see ghosts. Sadie wanted me to take a picture of her missing tooth because she believed history should remember important events. Mara listened more than she talked. But every time one of the children spoke, her eyes softened. There was a quiet strength about her, the kind that isn't born from an easy life, the kind that survives one. At one point, Sadie looked at my camera bag. Can you take a picture of Mom? Mara almost dropped the spoon. No, why not? Because I said so. Sadie looked at me. She never lets anyone. I glanced across the table. I don't photograph people without permission. Mara met my eyes. Even when the light is perfect? Especially then, I almost said it, because the light was perfect, the warm kitchen, the rain against the windows, the children laughing. The woman sitting across from me trying to take up less space than she deserved. Instead, I simply smiled. Even then, for a moment nobody spoke. The rain tapped softly against the windows. The old clock on the wall ticked quietly. And I realized something that made no sense at all. I had spent 20 years traveling the country, searching for places worth remembering. And somehow, after less than an hour, I was already afraid of forgetting this one. I told myself I would leave after dinner. That was the plan: finish the meal, thank Mara for her kindness, drive to the inn, wake up before sunrise and start working. Sybil, the problem was that Bellwether didn't seem interested in my plans. After dinner, Jonah decided I needed to see his collection of rocks. Not special rocks, just rocks. Apparently one of them looked exactly like Abraham Lincoln if you squinted and had a very generous imagination. Sadie wanted to show me the garden behind the house. Most of the flowers had already faded for the season, but she pointed at empty patches of dirt as though they were treasures. Mom planted those. They'll come back in spring. I looked toward the kitchen window. Mara was washing dishes. The warm light behind her turned the glass into a painting. She likes making things grow? I asked. Sadie nodded. She says houses get lonely if nobody plants flowers. Children say strange things. The unsettling part is how often they're right. When we went back inside, Mara was drying the last plate. You didn't have to entertain him all evening, she said. I was negotiating a rock collection. Who won? I'm not sure. Jonah walked into the room carrying 3 stones. I did. Mara smiled and shook her head, the kind of smile people wear when they've been tired for years but refuse to let their children notice. I helped clear the table, not because she asked, because it felt wrong to simply stand there. As we worked, our shoulders brushed once or twice, small accidents, the sort people pretend not to notice. You travel a lot? She asked quietly. Too much? You like it? I thought about airports, hotel rooms, rental cars, tiny bottles of shampoo that all smelled exactly the same. I used to think I did, and now? I looked around the kitchen, the old wooden cabinets, the children's drawings, the loaf of bread cooling beside the window. I'm not as sure as I used to be. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she dried another plate. My husband loved traveling. I looked at the silver ring hanging from the chain around her neck. He always said he'd take us across the country one day. The room became quieter. What happened? Her hands stopped moving. For a long time, I hated that question. I'm sorry. She shook her head gently. He died 4 years ago. There are moments when words only make things worse. This was one of them. I'm sorry. I said anyway. She gave a small smile. People always say that. I know. They don't know what else to say. No, I suppose they don't. The children ran through the hallway chasing each other. Jonah was carrying a blanket. Sadie was carrying what appeared to be half the living room. Mara watched them go. They still talk about their father every day. That's good. Some days. She looked out the window into the darkness. Other days I wonder if they're afraid they'll forget him. I understood that feeling better than I wanted to admit. Photographers spend their lives trying to stop time, maybe because deep down we know it never listens. Mara looked back at me. What about you? What about me? Who waits for you when you go home? I almost laughed. Nobody. Not anymore. A storage apartment in Brooklyn, a refrigerator with expired milk, a stack of unopened mail, a life carefully organized so I would never have to depend on anyone. I don't think anyone does, I admitted. She studied my face, not with pity. With understanding, from the living room, Sadie shouted, Mom, Mr. Mercer has to stay and watch a movie. Mara smiled. You don't have to. I looked toward the children, then back at her. For the first time in years, I realized there was nowhere else I actually wanted to be. And somewhere deep inside me, a very dangerous thought quietly appeared. Maybe I hadn't come to Bellwether to photograph a dying town at all. Maybe I had come here because something inside me was tired of being alone. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For 20 years, that had been my routine. Photographers learn quickly that the world is most honest before everyone else gets out of bed. I grabbed my cameras, checked the weather, and walked outside. The valley was covered in mist. The old bridges stood quietly over the creek like they had been waiting for someone. I should have gone straight to work. Instead, I found Mara sitting on her porch. She was wearing an old wax jacket and holding 2 cups of coffee. I had a feeling you'd be awake. I accepted the cup. You make a habit of feeding lost travelers? No, she smiled softly. Only the ones my children have already adopted. I laughed. I'm not sure that's official. Sadie told Jonah, you're coming back for breakfast. And what did Jonah say? He asked if photographers eat normal food. I survive mostly on gas station sandwiches and regret. She laughed again. It was becoming my favorite sound. We walked down a narrow trail behind her house. The grass was wet with dew. Birds were beginning to wake. You know this place well, I said. I've lived here my whole life. You never wanted to leave? She thought about it. When I was younger. And now? She looked across the valley. I think some people are meant to travel the world. And some? Some are meant to protect the places the world forgets. The answer stayed with me. We reached the first covered bridge just as the sun began to rise. Soft golden light spread across the old wood. Fog drifted over the creek. It was beautiful. The kind of scene photographers spend years chasing. I lifted my camera, then stopped. Mara was standing at the edge of the bridge looking out over the water. The morning light touched her hair. The valley seemed to settle around her. She wasn't posing. She didn't even know I was looking. For a second, I forgot why I had come. Aren't you going to take your picture, she asked. I lowered the camera. In a minute, she looked at me. That's not like a professional. No, it isn't. She walked onto the bridge and rested her hands on the old railing. My husband used to bring the children here. I walked beside her. They liked feeding the ducks. And you? I liked watching them. The silver ring hanging from the chain around her neck caught the morning light. I still come here when life gets loud. I understood that, more than I wanted to. Do you know why these bridges matter so much? She asked. History? She shook her head. Because they connect places that would otherwise stay apart. The words landed somewhere deep inside me. I looked at the bridge, then at the woman beside me. A strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe people weren't very different. Maybe some of us spent our whole lives pretending we didn't need anyone, while secretly hoping someone would build a way back to us. Mara looked toward the valley. You came here looking for something, the cover photograph. She smiled gently. I don't think that's true anymore. I wanted to disagree. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was still the same man who had arrived with 2 cameras and a suitcase full of deadlines. But the truth was becoming difficult to ignore. I had traveled across the country to photograph old bridges, and after less than 2 days, the thing I was most afraid of losing was a woman who had simply opened her front door and asked me to stay for dinner. By the third day, Bellwether had started interfering with my schedule. The old man at the general store spent 20 minutes explaining why modern coffee tasted dishonest. A woman named Mrs. Granger insisted I photograph her cat because, according to her, he had the face of a Civil War general. Jonah decided I needed to see a tree that looked exactly like a dragon. It didn't, but I pretended it did because he believed it. Mara never apologized for any of it. You wanted the town, she said one afternoon. The town comes with stories. I was promised bridges. She smiled. Bridges are just wood. People are what they connect. That was the frustrating thing about her. She had a habit of saying simple sentences that followed me around for hours. That afternoon, she took me to a bridge that wasn't on my map. The road was little more than 2 dirt tracks between open fields. We parked beside an abandoned barn and walked the rest of the way. You hide all the good places from tourists? I asked. We hide them from people who don't understand them. And you've decided that I do? She looked at me. I'm still deciding. The bridge was smaller than the others, old, weathered. The creek beneath it moved slowly through stones covered in green moss. No signs, no fences, no photographers. Just silence. I reached for my camera. Then noticed Mara wasn't looking at the bridge. She was looking at the names carved into the old wooden beams. Hundreds of them, generations of people leaving proof that they had existed. I stepped closer. Near the entrance were 2 initials inside a small heart, MWCW. She touched the carving gently. Caleb did that. I stayed quiet. He was 23. He was terrible with knives. I smiled. It looks pretty straight. She laughed softly. He practiced on 3 fence posts first. The laugh faded. We thought we'd grow old here. The wind moved quietly through the trees. He wanted to fix this bridge himself one day. I looked at the old wood. He probably would have. She nodded. He could fix almost anything. Then she looked at me. The strange thing about losing someone is that people think you stop talking to them. I didn't say anything. I still talk to him. Every day? Most days. She smiled sadly. I tell him when Jonah gets into trouble. I tell him when Sadie brings home another injured bird. And sometimes, she looked toward the creek. I tell him I'm tired. The honesty in her voice made the whole valley feel smaller. I had photographed grief before. I had built a career around other people's losses. But standing beside Mara, I realized there was a difference between seeing pain and knowing the person carrying it. What do you tell him? She asked. I frowned. Who? The person you talk to when nobody else is around. I almost answered too quickly nobody, but that wasn't true. I talked to the younger version of myself, the 21-year-old who believed success could replace a home, the husband who promised he'd be back in 3 days and stayed away for 3 weeks, the man who thought leaving was easier than staying. I said slowly, I spend a lot of time apologizing. Mara looked at me for a long moment, then she reached out and brushed a little dust from my jacket, such a small gesture, so ordinary, yet somehow more intimate than holding hands. You know, Daniel. What? I don't think this town needed someone to remember its bridges. I looked at her. What do you think it needed? Her eyes met mine. I think it needed someone willing to stop running long enough to see what was still here. I looked around at the quiet creek, the old bridge, the carved names, the woman standing beside me. And for the first time in 20 years, I forgot to pick up my camera. That evening, I sat alone outside the inn with my laptop open. The photographs from the last 3 days filled the screen. Mercy Bridge at sunrise. The old mill, the creek, the hidden bridge with its carved names. Technically, they were some of the best photographs I had ever taken. My editor would love them. The magazine would probably put one on the cover. 20 years of work had taught me how to recognize a winning image. The strange part was, I couldn't stop looking at the photographs where Mara had accidentally stepped into the frame, a hand reaching for one of the children, a silhouette on a bridge, a reflection in the creek. I should have deleted them. Instead, I kept coming back to them. My phone rang. It was my editor. Tell me you've got the cover. I've got something. Not something, Daniel. The photograph. I looked at the screen, at the hidden bridge, at the woman standing near its entrance with her face turned away from the camera. I think I do. Good. We're holding 8 pages for this? Don't come home with pretty. Come home with unforgettable. The call ended. I closed the laptop. For years, that conversation would have excited me. Instead, I felt tired. The next morning, Mara found me sitting beside the creek. You look like a man who lost an argument. I think I'm about to. She sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. The water moved quietly over the rocks. Birds called somewhere in the trees. Finally, she asked, "When do you leave?" I stared at the creek. "The day after tomorrow." She nodded. No surprise, no disappointment, just acceptance. I suppose that's what people like you do. What does that mean? You arrive, you leave, and somewhere in between, people get used to having you around. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I had spent most of my life proving she wasn't. My ex-wife used to say I was easier to miss than to keep. Mara looked at me. Was she right? I laughed quietly. I think she got tired of waiting for me to come home. And did you? What? Come home. I thought about New York, the apartment, the storage boxes, the empty refrigerator, the silence. I don't know where home is anymore. She looked across the valley. I do. I waited. She smiled sadly. It's the place where people are happy when you walk through the door. The sentence stayed between us, still honest, dangerous. A little later, we walked back toward her house. Jonah and Sadie were playing in the yard. The moment they saw me, they ran over. "You're late," Jonah announced. "I didn't know I had a schedule." "You do now." Sadie grabbed my hand. "We saved you a seat." I looked at Mara. She was watching us quietly. There was happiness in her eyes. And fear. The kind of fear people feel when something good arrives, after they've convinced themselves they no longer deserve it. As we walked toward the house, Sadie looked up at me. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes?" "When you go back to your city, who makes sure you eat dinner?" I smiled. "I usually manage." She frowned. "No, I mean who waits for you?" I couldn't answer because the terrible truth was, for 20 years, nobody had. And standing in the morning sun with a little girl holding my hand, I realized I had no idea what I was going back to. By the fourth day, Bellwether no longer felt like an assignment. It felt like a life I had somehow forgotten to live. I still photographed the bridges. I still woke before sunrise. I still carried my cameras everywhere. But my schedule had quietly rearranged itself around one family, breakfast at Mara's house, a walk with the children after lunch, an afternoon exploring another forgotten corner of the valley, dinner if the weather turned bad, dinner if it didn't. I stopped pretending there was a difference. That afternoon, Jonah decided he was old enough to learn photography. He followed me through a field carrying my backup camera with both hands. "How do you know what to take a picture of?" I smiled. "I wait until something matters." He thought about that. "How do you know?" "I usually don't." "Then how?" I looked toward Mara. She was sitting beneath an old oak tree while Sadie made flower crowns and insisted they were for important people. Sometimes I realized you only understand a moment after it's already gone. Jonah lifted the camera. "What would you take a picture of now?" I looked at the scene, the old tree, the children laughing, the woman watching them with quiet happiness. Then I answered honestly. "I'd try to remember this." Later that evening, the children fell asleep early. Jonah had spent the entire afternoon climbing trees. Sadie had spent the entire afternoon rescuing imaginary animals. Both were exhausted. Mara and I sat on the porch. The valley was quiet. A soft breeze moved through the fields. She handed me a cup of tea. "When you first arrived, I thought you'd be gone before sunset." "I almost was. What changed?" I looked into the dark yard. "I think I got tired. From traveling?" I shook my head. "From pretending that work was enough." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the stars. "Caleb used to sit out here with me." The name no longer surprised me. He believed people were like seasons. "What does that mean?" "He said some people pass through your life, and some become part of the landscape." I smiled. "He sounds wise." He was. She laughed softly. "He was also terrible at fixing fences." The laugh faded. "I still miss him." "I know," she looked at me, "and somehow, I don't feel guilty saying that to you." "You shouldn't." A long silence settled between us. The kind that only happens when two people stop trying to impress each other. Mara looked down at her hands. I forgot what it was like to have someone to talk to. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone. Instead, I told her the truth. I forgot too. She looked up. The porch light touched her face, the silver ring resting against her sweater, the tired kindness in her eyes. "You know what's strange?" she asked. "What?" "I don't feel like I've known you for 4 days." I smiled. "Neither do I." She looked out across the dark valley. "That scares me." It scares me too. The honesty between us was becoming impossible to ignore. I had spent years leaving places before they mattered, Leaving was easier, safer. No promises, no heartbreak, no one waiting for you. Mara stood and walked to the edge of the porch. I should go inside. I nodded, so should I? Neither of us moved. The wind carried the smell of rain and fresh grass. Then she turned back toward me. Daniel? Yes? When you leave, her voice almost disappeared. Will this just become another story you tell people? I stood up, walked toward her close enough to hear her breathing, close enough to see that she was afraid of the answer. Then I said the only thing I knew for certain. No. Why? Because somewhere between the old bridges, the quiet dinners, and two children who had started saving me a seat at the table, I had stopped feeling like a visitor, and somewhere deep inside me, I had started wishing I never had to leave. The next morning, Mara told me there was one bridge left. It isn't on the tourist maps, she said. I don't think I'm on the tourist maps either. She smiled. No, I noticed. We left after breakfast. Jonah insisted I would get lost without him. Sadie insisted she needed to come because bridges were lonely without children. Mamara somehow convinced them both to stay with Mrs. Granger next door. As we drove out of town in her old blue pickup, the silence between us felt different, not uncomfortable, careful. Like two people carrying something fragile. The road narrowed until it became little more than a trail. We parked beside an old stone fence and walked through a field covered in morning mist. I had only one camera with me, Mara noticed. Traveling light? I think I'm getting tired of hiding behind equipment. She looked at me. That sounds difficult. I've survived storms easier than this. A quiet laugh escaped her. We followed a narrow path through the trees, then the bridge appeared. It was smaller than the others. Older. The wood had faded to soft gray. Wildflowers grew along the creek beneath it. The whole place felt hidden from the rest of the world. Mara stopped walking. My husband brought me here when he asked me to marry him. I looked at the bridge, then at her. There was snow that day, she said softly. He was so nervous he dropped the ring. I smiled. What happened? I told him yes before he found it. She laughed, a beautiful, sad little laugh, then she looked at the old bridge again. I haven't brought anyone here since. The weight of those words settled over us. Why bring me? She took a slow breath. Because I needed to know something. What? She turned toward me. I needed to know if my heart was remembering or beginning again. I forgot about the camera. I forgot about the magazine. I forgot about every deadline waiting for me outside the valley. All I could see was the woman standing in front of me. A woman who had survived loss, raised two children, built a quiet life from broken pieces, and somehow still found the courage to hope. I stepped closer, close enough to hear the creek moving beneath the bridge, close enough to see the uncertainty in her eyes. I don't want to disrespect your past, I said quietly. You couldn't. I don't want to become a memory that hurts you. She smiled sadly. You already are. The honesty of it took my breath away. She looked down at the silver ring hanging from the chain around her neck. I still love him. I know, her eyes filled with tears, and somehow I'm starting to care about you too. There are moments when life gives a man the chance to hide. I had spent 20 years taking those chances, leaving before things became real, running before someone could ask me to stay. This time I stayed. I reached for her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. Her fingers slipped into mine, cold from the morning air, warm a second later. We stood together in the middle of that old bridge, while the world stayed quiet around us. No promises, no impossible speeches. Just two lonely people admitting that meeting each other had changed something they thought was gone forever. Mara looked at me with tears she wasn't trying to hide. This is a mistake, she whispered. I should have agreed. I should have remembered my flight home. The cover story. The life waiting for me beyond the valley. Instead, I looked at the woman whose front door had changed everything, and realized I no longer knew which life I was supposed to go back to. We didn't let go of each other's hands right away. The old bridge seemed to hold the silence for us. The creek moved quietly beneath the weathered boards. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called out. The rest of the world felt very far away. Mamara looked down at our hands. Then, gently, she stepped back. I should probably tell you something. I waited. I almost didn't bring you here. Why? She looked at the old bridge. Because this place belongs to the happiest day of my life. I understood. And I was afraid, she continued, that if I brought you here, I'd lose that memory. The silver ring hanging from the chain around her neck caught the morning light. I don't want to replace him, I said quietly. Her eyes met mine. I know, and I don't want you to forget him. A small smile appeared. I never could. The honesty between us had stopped being frightening. It had become necessary. I picked up my camera. Mara noticed. So, the famous photographer finally remembers why he came. I smiled. Maybe. She walked toward the center of the bridge, not posing, not performing. Simply standing there with one hand resting on the old railing. The morning fog drifted through the trees. Soft sunlight touched the weathered wood. It was perfect. The kind of image photographers wait their entire lives to find. I looked through the viewfinder. Then I heard her voice. Daniel. I lowered the camera. What? Her expression had changed. There was uncertainty in it. Hope, fear, the kind of courage that only appears when someone has already been hurt before. If you're going to take my picture, she looked at the old bridge beneath her feet. Don't make me beautiful because I'm sad. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent 20 years turning loss into photographs, abandoned towns, broken families, old men sitting alone on front porches. I always told myself I was preserving memories. But standing there, I wondered how many times I had simply borrowed someone else's pain. I won't, I said. She nodded. This time when I raised the camera, I didn't see a lonely widow. I didn't see a symbol. I didn't see the emotional center of a magazine article. I saw Mara, a woman who had survived grief, a mother who still planted flowers because she believed houses could become lonely, a person brave enough to open her front door to a stranger. I took 3 photographs, only 3, then I lowered the camera. She walked toward me. The old boards creaked softly beneath our feet. Did you get what you came for? She asked. I looked at the camera in my hand, then at the woman standing in front of me. No, she looked surprised. No? I shook my head. I came here looking for a cover photograph, and? I took a slow breath. I think I found a reason to stop running. For a second, she didn't speak, then tears filled her eyes. She reached up and touched my face. So what happens now? I wanted to tell her I would stay. I wanted to promise her a future. But the truth was waiting for us just beyond the trees. My editor, my career, the life I had spent 20 years building. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. Neither of us moved, it vibrated again. Mara looked at me. You should answer it. I don't want to. A sad little smile touched her lips. Daniel, not wanting to leave, isn't the same thing as knowing how to stay. My phone vibrated a third time. I stared at it. For a strange second, it didn't feel like a phone. It felt like the life I had spent 20 years building, demanding to be answered. Mara didn't say anything. She simply waited. I took the phone out of my pocket. My editor's name filled the screen. I almost let it ring again. Instead, I answered. Tell me you've got it, he said before I could speak. I looked at Mara. She was standing at the far end of the bridge, the morning light touching her hair. I got something. Not something, Daniel. The cover. We've already moved things around for this. I need the files tonight. My eyes stayed on Mara, the hidden bridge, the quiet valley, the woman who had somehow become more important than the assignment. I understand. You sound distracted. I'm just tired. His laugh came through the speaker. Sleep when you retire. The call ended. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Mara hadn't moved. What did he say? He wants the photographs. And you? I looked around the bridge, the creek, the trees, the place where she had trusted me with a piece of her past. I don't know what I want. She walked toward me slowly. I think you do. No, I think I only know what I've always done. And what is that? I smiled without humor. I leave. The wind moved softly through the trees. Mara looked at me for a long moment. My husband once told me something. What? He said people spend half their lives building cages and the other half wondering why they can't fly. I laughed quietly. That sounds like something a wiser man would say. He was. Her smile faded. But I think he also knew that fear can look a lot like responsibility. The sentence landed harder than I expected. Because I had spent years calling my choices necessary, the magazine needed me. The assignment mattered, successes required sacrifice. Maybe I had simply found better words for loneliness. We walked back toward her truck in silence. Halfway there, she stopped. What happens when you go home? I send the files. You get your cover. Maybe, and then? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My entire life had always been about the next assignment, the next country, the next photograph, the next goodbye. I had never planned for what came after winning. Mara watched me struggle with the answer, then she nodded gently. I thought so. When we reached her house, Jonah and Sadie were waiting in the yard. The moment they saw us, they came running. Did you find the secret bridge? Jonah asked. We did. Was it amazing? I looked at Mara. Yes. Sadie took my hand. Good. Now you don't have to leave. The words were simple. Children always make impossible things sound easy. I looked toward Mara. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking me to stay. That somehow hurt more. She was giving me the freedom to make my own choice. And for the first time in 20 years, I realized that success had never asked me the hardest question. A little girl standing in a quiet valley had. She looked up at me and smiled. When you go back to your city, Mr. Mercer, who's going to save you a seat at dinner? That evening, I stayed for dinner. No one called it the last one. Jonah spent 20 minutes explaining why geese were secretly evil. Sadie showed me a drawing she had made. There was a house, a bridge, a woman, a man carrying a camera. The camera was almost as big as my head. I made your hair nicer, she explained. Thank you. You're welcome. Mara stood at the stove, pretending to be busy. I had started to recognize that habit. When something mattered to her, she found work to do. Dinner was quieter than usual, not sad, careful. As if everyone in the room understood something was changing, but nobody wanted to be the first to admit it. After the children went upstairs, Mara carried 2 cups of tea onto the porch. The evening air was cool. The valley was wrapped in the soft blue light that comes just before night. She handed me a cup. You leave tomorrow. It wasn't a question. Yes. She nodded. For a while, neither of us spoke. The old porch creaked softly beneath our feet. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. The whole town seemed to be settling in for the night. I used to hate sunsets, Mara said quietly. I looked at her. Why? Because Caleb worked late. I always knew the light was disappearing, and I would sit here waiting for his truck. She smiled a little. Then one day, he didn't come home. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it. I thought losing him would be the hardest thing that ever happened to me. She looked out across the valley. But life is strange. How? Sometimes surviving is harder. The honesty in her voice hurt, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. It was the simple truth of a woman who had carried grief long enough for it to become part of her. She looked at me. When you knocked on my door, I wasn't lonely. I frowned. No? She shook her head. I had the children, the town, the house. I had a life. She smiled sadly. I had just forgotten that I was still allowed to want more. The words settled between us. I wanted to tell her I would stay. I wanted to promise her that none of this would end. But promises are easy. Keeping them is the part that matters. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. What? I don't know how to stop being the man I've always been. She squeezed my hand gently. I know. You do? I've been watching you. She laughed softly. You check your phone every hour. You look at your camera bag whenever the conversation gets too personal. And every time you're happy, you look guilty. I couldn't even argue, because she was right. I think you've spent so long leaving that you don't know how to let yourself stay. The porch became quiet again. Then she did something I wasn't expecting. She let go of my hand, not because she wanted distance, because she was giving me freedom. I can't ask you to stay, Daniel. I looked at her. Why not? Because if you stay for me, one day you'll wonder what your life could have been. And if you leave, a small tear slipped down her cheek. Then I'll wonder. The answer broke something inside me. She wasn't asking for sacrifices. She wasn't asking for promises. She was simply refusing to become another regret. She stood up. I should go inside. I stood too, Mara. She turned back. What? I looked at the warm kitchen window, the drawings on the refrigerator, the bicycles in the yard, the little house that had somehow become more familiar than my own apartment. Then I looked at the woman who had opened her front door to a stranger, and with more fear than I had ever felt holding a camera, I asked, if I came back, would you open the door again? I left before sunrise, not because I wanted to, because Mara had been right. If I had knocked on her door one more time, she would have invited me in for coffee. Coffee would have become breakfast. Breakfast would have become one more walk. One more conversation, one more reason not to leave. So I drove away while Bellwether was still asleep. I didn't look toward the house. I told myself that was strength. Months later, I would realize it was fear. By nightfall, I was sitting alone in a hotel room outside Chicago. My laptop was open. The photographs filled the screen. Mercy Bridge at dawn, the old mill, the hidden bridge, and one frame of Mara standing quietly beside it, her face turned away from the camera. My editor called. Tell me you've uploaded them. I just did. There was a pause. Then he laughed. Daniel, you finally got it. For 20 years, I had imagined hearing those words. I thought they would change my life. Instead, I looked at the photograph of Mara and felt absolutely nothing that resembled victory. The magazine released the issue 3 weeks. My name was on the cover, photographs by Daniel Mercer. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages. Famous photographers congratulated me. My ex-wife wrote one short sentence. I hope it was worth it. I stared at those words for a long time. I wanted to answer. I couldn't. The issue sold out. Interviews followed. Awards dinners. People shook my hand and told me I had captured something timeless. They were wrong. The photograph wasn't timeless. It was a goodbye. One night after an exhibition in New York, I came home to my apartment. I unlocked the door, walked inside, turned on the lights. The silence waiting for me was almost unbearable. No muddy boots by the door, no children's drawings, no one arguing about peas. No smell of fresh bread, just boxes, furniture, a refrigerator making more noise than the rest of the apartment. I stood there and realized something. For 20 years, I had believed success would make loneliness feel smaller. It didn't. It simply gave loneliness a better apartment. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee. It tasted terrible. Mara would have laughed. The thought hurt more than I expected. I opened the magazine again. The hidden bridge looked exactly the way I remembered it. Quiet strong. Waiting Mara was still there at the edge of the frame. The art director had called it the perfect human touch. He had no idea what he was talking about. He saw composition. I saw a woman standing beside the place where she had trusted me with her heart. I had spent 20 years believing that the right photograph would prove all the sacrifices had been worth making. Now I finally had the photograph, the career, the respect, the cover. And every night before I went to sleep, I found myself wondering the same thing. Not whether the bridges were still standing. Not whether the article had won another award. I wondered whether a little girl with a missing front tooth was still saving me a seat at the dinner table. By December, Meridian offered me another assignment. 6 countries, 3 months, a budget big enough to impress people who measured their lives by passports and deadlines. My editor placed the folder on the table. This is the next mountain, Daniel. 6 months earlier, I would have accepted before he finished the sentence. This time, I looked at the itinerary, airports, hotels, rental cars, another collection of beautiful places I would leave before they mattered. I closed the folder. Give it to someone else. He laughed. He thought I was negotiating. I wasn't. 2 weeks later, I resigned. People called it burnout, a midlife crisis. One photographer told me I was throwing away the best years of my career. Maybe I was. But every night, I kept thinking about a small house in a forgotten valley, a porch light, 2 bicycles. A woman who believed houses could become lonely if nobody planted flowers. I sold my apartment, packed my things. Kept one old camera, the first serious camera I had ever owned. The rest went into boxes. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't driving toward an assignment. I was driving toward a question. Spring had begun when I reached Hollow Creek Valley. The GPS signal disappeared. I smiled. Some things weren't meant to be found by satellites. The old wooden sign was still there. Welcome to Bellwether. This time the number had changed. Someone had crossed out 80. Underneath, another number had been written by hand, 81. I stared at it for a long moment. The town was still counting. I drove slowly through the valley, the old mill, the church. The dragon tree Jonah had insisted was magical. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Everything looked more important. Then I saw the stone wall. Smoke drifted from the chimney. 2 bicycles stood in the yard. One was bigger now. The other was still lying on its side. I parked the truck. For a full minute, I didn't move. I had crossed deserts, climbed mountains, photographed wars. Nothing had ever frightened me as much as walking toward that front door, because this time, I wasn't arriving with an excuse, no magazine, no assignment. No camera crew, just a man hoping he wasn't too late. I climbed the porch steps, knocked once, footsteps crossed the floor, the door opened. Jonah stood there. He looked taller, older. He stared at me for half a second, then his face lit up. Mr. Mercer! He turned and shouted into the house. Mom, it's him! Sadie appeared behind him. She looked at me with complete seriousness. You took a very long time. I know. She folded her arms. We thought you got lost. I smiled. I think I did. Then I looked past them. Mara had stepped into the hallway. She was wearing a simple green sweater. There was flour on one hand. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. For a second, neither of us moved. All the months between us stood quietly in that doorway. Every goodbye, every lonely night, every choice. She looked at me with tears she wasn't trying to hide. Then, very softly, she said my name. Daniel. I held up the old camera in my hand. The photographs are finished. She looked confused. What photographs? I smiled. The ones that mattered. And for the first time in my life, I had come back to a place without planning to leave. For a moment, nobody moved. I stood on the porch holding the old camera. Mara stood in the hallway with flour on her hands. The children looked back and forth between us with the patience of people who already knew the ending. Then Sadie sighed dramatically. I told you he'd come back. Jonah folded his arms. I said he was probably trapped in New York. I laughed. I was. Mara's eyes never left mine. Months had passed, the magazine, the awards, the interviews. None of them seemed real anymore. The only thing that felt real was the little house in front of me. She took one small step forward. I came back. Why? I looked down at the old camera in my hands. For 20 years, I thought photographs were the only way to keep beautiful things. I looked back at her. I was wrong. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was relief. The kind people feel when they finally stop pretending. Mara walked onto the porch. She was close enough now that I could smell fresh bread and the faint scent of orange soap. The cover story? I left. Her eyebrows lifted. The magazine? I left that too. She searched my face. You love that job. I did. And now? I smiled. I think I spent most of my life photographing other people finding a home because I was afraid to look for one myself. A tear slipped down her cheek. She laughed softly and wiped it away. You're making this very difficult. I know. I was planning to be sensible. I've heard that's overrated. She laughed again, the same quiet laugh that had first welcomed me into her kitchen. Then she looked at the old camera. Did you bring it to take a picture? I shook my head. No, I held it out to Jonah. His eyes grew wide. Really? Really, but it's important. So are you. He took it carefully, like someone holding a promise. Sadie slipped her hand into mine. Does this mean you're staying for dinner? I looked at Mara. She smiled through her tears. I think that depends. On what? She tilted her head. Are you planning to disappear again? I took a slow breath. For years that answer would have frightened me. Now it felt easy. No, not tomorrow. No, not when life gets difficult. I shook my head. I've spent too much of my life leaving. The children looked confused. Adults often make simple things sound complicated. Sadie solved the problem. She smiled. Good, because we already saved you a seat. Mara closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she reached for my hand. Not carefully, not secretly, just naturally. The evening sun settled over the valley. Somewhere beyond the trees, the old bridges still stood waiting, connecting places that would otherwise remain apart. I finally understood why they had mattered so much, not because they were old, not because they were beautiful, because they gave people a way across. Mara squeezed my hand. What are you thinking about? I looked at the little house, the bicycles, the children, the woman who had opened her door to a stranger on a rainy afternoon. Then I smiled. I spent 20 years looking for the perfect photograph, and I looked at the family standing beside me. I think I was standing on the wrong side of the camera. She rested her head against my shoulder. The porch light came on. The smell of dinner drifted through the open urn. And together, we walked inside, because sometimes the most important journey a person ever takes isn't across a country. It isn't toward success. It isn't toward a dream. Sometimes it's simply the walk back to the front door that someone quietly left open for you.